Okay. Well, generally these sessions, for those who've not been before, are really just open for any questions and sharing and things you might want to ask or talk about. There's no particular topic, so feel free to ask or share or talk about anything you like, and I'll throw it open. So.
Wow.
So I've got a question.
Okay.
Your blog from yesterday from Freedom Arc, I'm not remembering exactly how it's all worded out, but it basically was talking about people not being prepared for what is coming. Is there anything that you can expound on other than what you had in your blog on that one? I don't particularly pay too much attention to what was happening on the news or the underground news, but I haven't sensed anything either that I need to be preparing for. Can you talk about that?
I didn't write the blog, so remind me of what it said.
Oh.
It's from my teaching, but it's actually at work.
Let me see.
So,
I'll see if I can find it and then come back on when I can find that. Hold on.
Okay. So, I mean,
yeah.
What I wouldn't have been talking about is being prepared for negative things or that type of thing. I wouldn't be saying, oh, well, we got to get ready because this terrible stuff is going on, or that type of thing. If it was, it's probably an old one. Is it the new one or the old one? I mean, the newest one was Times of Refreshing. But we do recycle some of the old ones as well. So the latest.
It was posted yesterday, and it was about sealed up until the end of time, number 179.
Okay.
Basically, we're in a time where God is doing new things he's never done before, and many people don't believe that. So kind of almost like, it was almost like talking about the church having their head in the sand and just being.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, in that way, I believe that God is continually looking to draw people out from the institutional restrictions that they may be under, or they may be unaware of things because the stream they're in doesn't really bring people into a revelation of stuff. So, it's not that bad things are going to happen, but more that God is doing good things and they're not embracing it. So they may not have engaged heaven, or they still may be stuck in well, you can't go to heaven until you die, or that type of dynamic. So that, we need to be able to encourage people to see there is way more than what they've ever experienced up to this point. So being ready, for us, being ready for that is being ready to share, being ready to reach out to people, being ready to give a good report. The whole Sons of Issachar thing really is about knowing the times and the seasons and being ready for whatever God is doing and being in cooperation with him in doing it. So in that sense, it's like, the Joshua generation are forerunners after Joshua and Caleb, who crossed over and then gave a good report. There are plenty of people giving bad reports and misrepresenting God or misrepresenting what is coming from a negative doom and gloom standpoint. We need to be ready to give a good report and an optimistic report of, hey, God is doing some things beyond what you can imagine or think. So engage it, be open to it. Don't miss it in that sense. No, I don't think people will ever miss it, because God just keeps giving people an opportunity, but they'll miss out on it at this point when they don't need to. So we do need to, I think, have people to give a really good report of, hey, there is so much more. And I do believe also that God is stirring people to realize there must be more than this. There's more, whatever they've experienced, there's more. And there's a sort of holy dissatisfaction which God is stirring up within people. And I think we can be part of that to say, hey, there is more. Don't be content to stay where you are. You know, even those who did cross over, 2.5 tribes settled on back on the other side. You know, they were content seemingly to see some things and then not living them. So we need to encourage people to really to engage the fullness. I think that's my perspective. And that there are whole people groups and whole continents who really aren't yet engaging in what God is doing today. So we need to find ways of engaging them and opening up those avenues so that the truth and the light will begin to touch people and bring them into their inheritance and their destiny. You know, I think sonship is what God wants us all to function in. And participating in sonship is being active as a son, not passive, and being co-heirs within the kingdom and being actively involved in doing what God is unveiling. So I think that's really what I would say in some of that.
No, that's really good, because it was talking about the shaking that was coming, but it's really awesome to be able to explain to people, you don't have to be afraid about what's happening.
Yeah.
You know, this is from, you know, the Lord is doing these things and this is why. So it's actually an opportunity to be quite encouraging.
Yeah. I mean, I think from a perspective of, you know, yet once more I will shake all things, you know, Hebrews, you know, from one perspective that's already been fulfilled, but from another, God is always wanting to do things in our lives that unveil that which we're leaning to our own understanding about, and that which is revealing that where we are based on the foundation of the kingdom and not our own foundation. Because, you know, it talks about shaking everything that can be shaken, which is man-made effectively, to reveal that which is God, and therefore things we can rely on. And God, sorry, excuse me, sometimes God does do things to bring us to that point, to show us, hey, we're relying in ourselves here, and that is never really going to get the job done. And sometimes we go through things that reveal that, you know, because that's a good thing to reveal. Hey, I'm trusting in my own strength in this, or I'm relying on my own understanding, or I'm relying on my history or knowledge or experience, rather than, hey, I'm trusting, seeking first the kingdom and actually putting my trust in God to be my provider and to be my safety and security and to be, you know, directing me, you know, every day, you know. So I do think shaking takes place within our lives just to reveal those areas that are not fully functioning as God would like them to. You know, it's not a negative thing. It very much is a positive thing. But it can be presented negatively by people who always lay things on the enemy, or the enemy's doing this, or the enemy's doing that, and so bad things are happening. It must be the enemy. God doesn't bring bad things, but sometimes those things, God brings good out of them, you know, so that we do discover. It's often through the trials and tribulations and troubles that we realize how much our trust is in God and how much is not. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you about the dissatisfaction of things. I've found myself maybe the last couple of years being really dissatisfied in you know, organizational things. In fact, to the point of when I hear sermons and things like that, I get really nauseous sometimes hearing some of that stuff. You know, I live right in the middle of the Bible Belt, and it's I mean, wow, I really struggle with that, you know, trying to balance Christianity. And we've actually left our church 2 years ago, and so many of the things that you share with us about you know, stepping out of the Word. The Lord led me to step out of the Word a few years back, and and basically just engage the written word when he leads me there. You know, I don't engage it too often. I don't, and when we actually left our church, I left with a lot of wounds and that type of thing. And over the last 2 years have really done a lot of healing, but still it's I feel the Lord drawing us back into building relationships with people. And, you know, it's fearful, just to say the least. It's, you know, I don't want to step back in and get whammed all over again.
No,
So,
yeah. I mean, I think many people are in the same sort of situation as they're realizing there is more. They're not satisfied with where they are, and therefore they look for that by leaving some of the things behind, but then not finding the reality of that in relationship with people. I think the key is we need to be in relationship with people. The kingdom is about relationship. God is relational. Everything is relational. I do believe Jesus said that he would build his ecclesia. I don't believe he said he would build what we know as church. You know, but I do believe he is building his ecclesia, which is people gathered. And I do think there is something in gathering with people, which is important, to create a relational outworking. You know, it's like Jesus said, you know, it's your love for one another, which will let the world see that you're my disciple. So there is something that we should be different in the way that we relate to one another than the world does. Often that's not true. And in fact, you know, most people are more wounded by the church than they are by the world. And we obviously have to deal with that. But we do also need people who are willing to say, hey, here am I, let's do something new.
Yeah.
You know, so not just relating to people, but looking to relate to people with a mandate from God to establish something new that is going to draw people out of the structures that they may be in, which is limiting them. Some people are very happy and content there at this point in their journey, and that's okay. But those who are feeling there's got to be more than this, you know, I'm feeling restricted, I'm not, this is just, we're going over old ground and what's really changing. I think God is stirring people to realize that there is a dissatisfaction that God is creating. It's making sure that that dissatisfaction is motivates the right things and not the wrong things.
Right.
You know, the worst thing to do when God starts to stir that dissatisfaction is to try and then be a thorn in the side of those that you're already in with and try and be a hassle to them.
Yeah.
You're not going to change the structure of an institution from within unless you are in the position of authority that can do it. And that is very few people. And most people in those positions of authority don't want to change because they're happy with the situation and their position within it. So I do believe that when that dissatisfaction comes, the best thing to do is to leave and seek to pursue God, unless he tells you specifically to stay. You know, there should be no issue. And all this sort of the negativity about, oh, you're leaving the covering of the church and, you know, you'll be unprotected. It's just, you know.
Well, you're reading my mail right there.
Really, to create fear, to keep, keeping the coffers full and other things. So I don't have any issue with encouraging people to be open to leave institutions, but then not to just be on their own, but to seek to see what does God want to do now? Can we establish something new? And look to see what that might be.
Well, just like this program, things are opening up in our world. It's been a few years, like I said, but it's really this year, by the end of 2018, is really began to open up new avenues to engage with new places, new things like yourself and others, you know, that I know more locally. So kind of exciting.
You know, I know Arthur Burke does a series of seminars on life after church. And his whole view in that is that it's God who has been calling people out. This is a move of God to call people out of an institution to get ready for what he's going to do next. But at some point, we've got to start doing some things that are the next thing of what he's doing. Otherwise we end up on our own and isolated, which I don't believe he wants us to be. Now I know, because we've got online things and we can connect to people online, that's good. But I think God does want to have physical expressions of things that can be a demonstration to others who are looking for something. And that's not just believers who are looking for something, but also the people in the world who are looking for reality. They really are looking for a reality which will be a demonstration of what real love is. And I think that's our remit, is to demonstrate real love, the love we have with God, and therefore the love we then demonstrate to each other and the world in which we live in. That is really what a rising and shining is. That glory really is the intensity of the love of God that we carry and live in, which enables people to see and get drawn to the light for which we shine. Just we need more. We need to see more expressions of that people can genuinely engage in. And that doesn't have to be mega churches and big things. It can be small groups of people just beginning to form relationships and foundations that God will add to.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anyone else got anything they want to talk about? Everyone's quiet now. You must have something God's saying, Pam. What's going on with you? Your 111s or 222s or 444s? I keep seeing you posting.
Yeah, I keep getting them. They just, I just grab my phone and it's like just jump out at me. So, no, I'm pondering this. It was interesting to see a news report that China successfully landed on the dark side of the moon with a probe. I thought that's interesting. I'm looking forward to what's going on there. That's all. Just some things.
Well, yeah, if they show everything that's going on there, but yeah, no, I think that's an interesting thing. Yeah, reminds me of the deep purple, Pink Floyd album, isn't it? Dark Side of the Moon, which was fun. Yeah.
My husband was playing that the other day too, and I'm like, why they're playing that?
Oh, there you go. See, it was prophetic. Now people have landed on the dark side of the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the album cover is a prism, isn't it? With sort of the 7 colors of the rainbow coming out of the prism, which I guess is a unveiling of something, perhaps.
I have no idea. Yeah, I have no idea. Only thing I can tell you is about Pink Floyd. I believe back in my high school, they came and did that's how far back I go. They did a little party before they were big.
Okay, well,
I know very little about them though.
Okay, well, yeah, no, I do like them. But anyway, yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So, who's got some questions they want to ask?
I see there's a lot of exposing going on.
Yeah.
A lot of mishandling of the gospel, mishandling of the people of God, the fleecing of the sheep, and there's some exposure really going on right now, and I expect to see it increase. I'm watching for it to increase. It is time.
Yeah, I would say, again, this is part of the shaking of all things, in the sense of the light begins to shine, and therefore it exposes things which are hidden from the light previously. And the more, as sons of God, that we are engaging legislatively, governmentally, that we're taking our positions in the realms of heaven, the more what we're doing is beginning to bring things into the light, and it will. Some of those things will be things which are definitely the things you described, the things that are going on within the religious institutions that are hindering people from really being God's sons in that way, but also I think in the world as well. And I do think we do need to be in knowing the times and the seasons and being ready for that. In light of, when you look at the last few years, you can see a lot of scandals where things have come into the light, which have exposed, obviously within the whole media industry and the stuff with, women being abused and people being abused and all that sort of stuff. And that stuff has come to the light. We had a major thing that came to the light in the UK about child abuse within the football, soccer industry and coaches, and all of those things. We had a major thing about, our public school, which is our private school system, and the abuses that went on there with discipline and people being beaten. A lot of things are coming into the light because I believe, those things are institutional within the system and they need to be exposed so that people are not subject to that negativity that's going on. And I think people are legislating for the unveiling of things, but we need to be ready to help the people who then are exposed themselves. The people who are the people who suddenly this stuff comes back and they start remembering things that happened when they were kids and stuff. We need to be ready to be able to help them and to be able to minister freedom and healing and wholeness to them, because it's very traumatic when things get brought into the light for people and they have to face them again, if you like, because a lot of people bury things and they hide things and they dissociate from things and they self-medicate from things, and then when the memories get brought back, they find it difficult to cope with the memories if there's not support. Within our day center here, there was a guy who, when the football thing scandal broke, he was within a football academy and now is living on the streets, and it all came back how he was abused, and and we had to try and help him deal with that because it was a major issue that came back, and eventually he contacted the helplines and he gave information and to help see people prosecuted, which was a very difficult thing for him to do. But with support, we can help people work through the difficult things that do come into the light when things get exposed. The same thing, I think, some streams of churches and things, there are things being exposed, and some of the leadership scandals, and there are some big ones that are going to come to light, which will hopefully enable people to see that they can't rely on other people, but they need to turn towards God himself, not get disillusioned with God, but realize that we shouldn't be putting people on pedestals or having the celebrity thing as it is. I think God wants all of us to, we're all equal effectively in God's sight. We're all loved, we're all special, we're all equal. That's not the way it is portrayed within the top-down hierarchical structures. There are people who are, I think, idolized, and that's a danger because, any idol is taking our eyes off God and putting it on men. And, men are always going to be imperfect. We need to keep our eyes fixed on God, and some of the things which keep people stuck in those old institutional things, I think God will bring things into the light that helps people to see that there's something more than this that we need to pursue.
Another thing that I think needs to be legislated, there's also this see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. I see so many covering their own eyes with their hand, putting fingers in their ears going, la, 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 I don't want to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, covering their mouth. Oh, I'm not going to speak on that. And that needs to be legislated, I think, because it's very frustrating. I'm like, if you open your eyes, you'll see.
Yeah, Jesus had no problem bringing the religious institution into the light and challenging it. It's like, he didn't say he said some fairly straight and direct things to the Pharisees and Sadducees and the high priests and whatever. He didn't have a problem saying, hey, you've turned the house of God, a house of prayer, into a den of thieves, and turning the money changers' tables over and everything else. And if we see some of those things, I think, yeah, you're right. People need to have the courage to be able to speak and not cover up or be part of a cover up or be afraid to actually speak the truth. Now, obviously in love and for the right motive and reason, but the truth is the truth, and we need to be willing to bring the truth so that people can see it and be aware of it. And that means being willing and not, as you say, I know I don't want to go there, and no, it's not my responsibility. If you see it and it is. It's like, if not you, who? And I think this is the thing where responsibility comes with the territory of being sons. And you can't abdicate responsibility by saying, no, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to do anything. Someone else will do it. We need to be prepared to speak the truth in love and bring things into the light, just as Jesus did, and to expose, what did he say? The blind are leading the blind, and actually if we are not blind and we see some of that, then we need to be proactive about doing it. Now, with wisdom and with love, and not out of anger or frustration or hurt or any of those things, but Jesus was able to be angry without it being sin. Being angry with a bad situation should motivate us to do something about it. And so anger can be a positive motivation to see, hey, we need to see change. And I would say we need to see some major changes within the whole Christian community to bring about the reality of what God really intends it to be. Now that can be, hey, let's demonstrate what it's really like. And then, hey, now you can weigh what you think it's really like by looking at this and looking at that. And I'm not saying that that's not a valid thing. I think it is. But sometimes we need to actually take things to court in heaven. We need to actually to deal with things in a spiritual dynamic, and to set people free from what they're in bondage to and what they're being controlled by and what they're being, fear being used to keep people in line and all the things that go on. We should be doing something about some of those things, I believe, as well. So, yeah, Kimberly. Oh, let's unmute you there. Hang on. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So with all that, what has been, I guess, your response to some of the leadership where they're demanding that they be a voice and they're making themselves a voice and leading people astray, who's calling themselves believers and lovers of Jesus? And I really do believe they love Jesus, but they're so full of pride of themselves. How have you effectively addressed their deception?
In the way of, you're talking about what leaders who are, I'm not really that involved in the sort of religious system at all, so I'm not always aware of what you might be talking about. I mean, I'm not doing talk about individual names, but get some sort of example of what you're sort of. Yeah, no, more of people who have been counseled
by sons to take a year off and just wait and really grow in who they are in their own identity in Christ before they take over churches. And there's a whole lot of damage that they are doing. It's almost like they're creating cults, having people follow themselves instead of really understanding. I mean, they just don't listen to the counsel that's been given to them. Do you just step back and not engage? Because it does make me angry, you know, or it has made us angry because of what has happened to the people that they're hurting.
I think in all this stuff, I think there's stuff which is just, you know, Christianese, you know, don't touch God's anointed and all that sort of stuff. That's just an old covenant thing. It's nothing to do with the new covenant. You know, we need to speak the truth in love. If you're in a position to do something with the people who are being affected by that, then I think do so. Help people and help deprogram people from the religious programming and the fear and the things that are going on. I think we can legislate at higher levels. I mean, when I started to do this back in, I think, 2014, you know, 15, I think, when I sort of started to do some higher level court cases, you know, I saw some quite interesting results that saw an exposing of whole movements of where leaders were heavily controlling, narcissistic, really doing that sort of thing. But it came into the light and the whole movement sort of effectively collapsed, you know, and there were certain leaders who were very well known who were using their positions wrongly. And, you know, I think not that, you know, and those leaders we want to see restored. You know, it's not that we want to see people exposed without having the opportunity of being restored, but we don't want to see people leading lots of people astray and controlling lots of people into their cult-like, you know, way of doing things. Anything which does not bring people into the freedom of hearing God for themselves and allowing God to lead them, to me, is wrong. And there is so much of that that's going on, which I personally, I want to see changed. You know, I want to see legislative things taking place and the sons of God looking to really see change in that. You know, I want to see people come into the freedom that they have in Christ of free access to God, no mediation, you know, no mediatorial coverings that, you know, all these things are putting people under, which means that they hinder people hearing God for themselves and, you know, having that personal responsibility of relationship with God. So I think there are things that can be done. You have to have a mandate to do it. That's the key. I wouldn't do it just because I'm angry with it's going on. I would take that anger back to God and say, is this holy anger? And is this something that you want me to do something about? And then ask for a mandate to do something. And then there may be others who are also doing the same thing, or come together, or God will bring you together with other people, or to actually legislate into those things. You know, part of raising up ambassadors groups which is what I'm doing at the moment, is that we will start to look at what is hindering people from experiencing their sonship, and therefore looking to legislate into that, so that people will be set free from whatever's holding them back, keeping them controlled or in fear or everything else, so that they can truly pursue their destiny as sons of God, and we can really start to see things change. You know, I don't think that the institutions will ever completely disappear, but I think more and more people will realize there is something better and there is something more real and what God intended. And they will begin to be an exodus out of those things to actually see something new established. But We need to see the new things established so that there's a model. There's something to look at and say, hey, this is what it can be like. You know, now not to say anything's going to be perfect, but anything which has a foundational government which releases people and gives people permission and does not control them is the hallmark of something new. You know, the Moses generational hallmark is mediatorial coverings and bringing people under people's coverings. And I think that's an old covenant model, which most of the church functions in, which is got to be different if we're going to do something which highlights that and brings a revelation of something new. You know, so yeah. Yeah, Lisa. Yeah, there.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, as we realize that, you know, we co-labor with the unseen, you know, that when you do have those conversations with those people, you got to realize that you go with more than just, you know, love, but you come armed with, you know, the unseen realm that is ready there to also, you know, bring truth to them. Because like you can't convince somebody in their mind. It's got to be, sometimes you have to just minister straight to their spirit, you know, like you speak to their spirit in an authoritative way that allows them the freedom to see it. Because some of it is even like when he does expose, it's so you can let it go, so you can let him heal what is the reason you've got this mask on, this pretend, because you don't really have relationship, because you know you've got this other thing going on that keeps everybody at bay and keeps everybody else at, you know, like, wait a minute, that's not relationship. So but I think when we realize that we walk with angels and we co-labor with angels, that it's not just us talking to that person, but you know that even as I'm like dealing with the Hebrew letters and stuff, it's like maybe seeing that person sitting in the fire of God, you know, and it might be uncomfortable, but on the other side, there's nourishment. When you sit in the fire, there's nourishment. You realize, you know, how free you were not, and you realize how merciful he is with your, you know, ignorance and you know, so yeah, there's other ways to, like, you know, release your sonship into a situation where maybe they don't have an ear that hears, you know, and maybe, you know, that realizing that you don't go alone, that you go with a force behind you, that it is a force for redemption, because that person operating in that thing isn't redemption. It's a facade. It's not real. You know, there's no life on it. There's only bondage. So, you know, we just have to realize that we're bigger than we think we are.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would accept that. And I think, see, when we're talking about legislating into things, we're looking at bigger pictures, not just individuals. We can see within movements, we can assign angels to go into a movement, to bring things into the light. You can assign angels to send messages. You can release a sound and a frequency yourself. Release light, release sound. I mean, I've done that numerous times, which is released into the spiritual atmosphere that can be targeted. You can target people with love bombs, with revelation that is lightning bolts from heaven. I mean, there's so much that more than just, hey, I'm going to talk to somebody, that we have at our disposal. You know, there are weapons, which are weapons of love, which we need to employ. And that means sometimes we need to, you know, target things, you know, and I have no issue with that. And sometimes you need someone who's going to be the spotter, who can say, here's the target. Let's see this laser guided smart bomb of love explode in this situation. Now, when a love bomb explodes, let's say within a people group or within a movement, it may have quite a detrimental effect to that movement when it reveals God.
It can be messy.
You know, because it's going to reveal and unveil God himself in a way which highlights how they're being deceived, or, you know, the true God is being hidden within all these religious doctrines and theological positions which misrepresent God. So I believe, you know, people, when they genuinely experience the love of God, it will begin to smash down some of the wrong views that they have been presented with him. And there's nothing wrong for me to actually to target specific groups. Now, God often gives people an opportunity to respond. You know, recently a friend of mine went to a very well-known organization, movement within the US, presented, hey, a positive representation of what God was doing to that movement as an opportunity of that whole movement embracing something new, and they totally rejected the message, or the leader totally rejected the message and publicly rejected the message and the person who brought the message. Now, when God gives someone an opportunity of embracing something new and they reject it, that opens the door for people to really begin to see things as they are. On the same day that this happened, a whole missionary group left that organization. And a lot of people started to see things as they are, because when people do things like that, it's never done in a nice way, you know, and it's not done in a loving way. And that in itself will highlight the flaws within a movement or within a leader of a movement. Because the part of the problem is a lot of these big movements are really led by strong individuals who control things, and others within these movements are controlled by those very strong personalities. And ultimately, people need to see things for the way they are. And that's not to say that they don't have truth, that they've not brought truth, that they've not brought good things in the past. But you get up to the promised land, and then people start stopping you going in, giving a bad report. Those people died in the wilderness ultimately, you know. And I do believe we're going to see a generation of the older generation of Moseses who are going to start falling away. It's already happened. You know, you're starting to see that older generation pass, and it will become not just the really, really old people of that generation, like Billy Graham or whatever, not knocking him at all, but actually younger people as well, who are rejecting what God is really doing and are hindering people coming into a revelation of the truth. You know, and often it becomes an elitist thing. One of the criticisms that this person brought to my friend was, yes, what you're saying, but it's only for the elite. It's not for everybody. You know, and when you start to get that, that's an indication of the control and everything that's involved within an organization. Because to open up the avenue of everyone hears God for themselves removes the power of the person who hears God for them. And if you've got the major prophet who continues to put out the things that God is saying and produce book after book of all the things that God is saying, what that person is actually doing is not encouraging the people to hear God for themselves by being the substitute for, you don't need to hear God, you're hearing God through me. So it's a real risk and a danger for those people to allow people to hear God for themselves or to access heaven and have the revelation and everything else. So I do believe, yeah, we do need to be open to challenge that and to use every resource that we have at our disposal, including all the angelic realm and the things that are in the weapons house of heaven and things, to be able to use those things effectively to set people free. You know, I just want to see people set free. You know, I want to see those leaders who are hindering people set free. You know, I don't want to see them die in the wilderness. But I also am not prepared to let them carry on doing what they're doing if they're not responding to what God is calling them to. Now, there are others who I've seen respond. You know, I remember Paul Keith Davis going to minister with Ian Clayton. And I heard the next time he did a podcast, he publicly apologized for hindering people being able to access heaven. Because he was telling people, well, you can only go when you're called, and you can't just step. And that totally changed. And I respect and honor people like that who are willing to learn and then coming back and say, hey, what I was doing, I now realize I wasn't right. But you will find very, very few people who publicly acknowledge that they're wrong within things. I mean, there were some major prophetic figures who prophesied that there was going to be a red landslide within your sort of midterm elections.
Yeah.
They prophesied there was going to be this landslide, that, you know, the whole Republican thing, we're going to take over, you know, the landslide within the Senate, within House of Representatives, all that stuff. It never happened. In fact, the opposite happened. A friend of mine challenged them publicly, because they knew them, to publicly come out and say they were wrong. They just completely blocked her and unfriended her and would not respond. Now, for me, that shows where people's hearts are. You know, anyone who's willing to say, hey, I got it wrong, that to me is someone who is secure in God. People who are refusing to acknowledge when they've made major prophetic statements that didn't come about and then hide behind it, for me, that's some of the issues that need to be brought into the light. People need to be held accountable for the things that they're prophesying to large groups of people or movements that are leading people astray or who are not really bringing the truth. And I think there's a lot of things that we need to do to begin to try and facilitate that happening. Because I want to see people come into the fullness of their inheritance as sons of God. I don't want to see people stuck and hindered and restricted by whatever systems they're in. Yeah, Pam, you got your hand up there?
Yeah, you know, as we grow the body of Christ, it seems to me you will always, or for a long time yet to come, you're going to need those with the bullhorn walking through the crowd saying, thus saith the Lord. You're going to need that, because people, it's like the deaf can't hear without that, you know? But how do you legislate those with the bullhorn from climbing these huge platforms, you know, and becoming the center of attention? Because it's not even as much that the laity see them as the center of attention, but the power of it just corrupts them. You know, you hear so many people talk, you know, they say stuff, oh, this is like a David, this person is like a David. And then they'll come back and defend that person saying, well, you know, David killed a man and God still loved him. I said, do you guys not realize before David became king, he was a man after God's own heart, and the power is what corrupted David? Are you guys not looking at the whole story? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, because there's always going to be a need and a love, or at least for a long time yet to come, there's a need for Abraham, I think, because, I don't know, because Abraham left his, am I making sense?
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem people sharing what God is saying, as long as what they're sharing is pointing people to go to God themselves to get a deeper revelation of what it is they're sharing, rather than the focus being on them or on their message.
Right.
It's who sent the messenger. Everything that's done should be pointing people to come into a deeper relationship with God, to find God for themselves, not to be dependent on the prophet next prophecy.
Right.
You know? And I think, you know, I share things. I mean, I'm doing the Vision Destiny 2019 thing, which I do at the beginning of the year. And, you know, I've got 12 sessions of my journals and the things that God said during last year and things that he was doing and whatever. But I preface each thing saying, look, please do not accept what I'm saying because I'm saying it. In fact, don't believe what I'm saying. Go back to God with it and get his perspective on it, because I'm giving you how I've received what he's saying to me. Make sure you go and get firsthand revelation of what he's saying, not information coming from me. Because if it's information coming from me and people are just, hey, great, that's good information, or that's the truth, and they're not discerning enough to go and engage God to get what that means for them. Does it have an application to them? What is God saying to them through it? Then all you're doing is creating these dependencies on the person who can go and hear God. Now, I know I can hear God, and I know I can have a relationship with God, and I do, that he speaks to me and we have conversations, and I have journals and journals full of it. And there are things that I have permission to share from the things that he shares with me. But I do not want people waiting for Vision Destiny 2019 to hear what's God saying for this year. Bottom line is, it's like, I want people to go and ask that God for themselves, and to go and even take some of the things that God has spoken to me and say, okay, what does that mean to me? How are you revealing this to me? Otherwise, it will do the same thing. It will just inoculate people. Oh yeah, God's saying this. Well, who said? Well, Mike said. Well, did God say that to you? Well, no, he said it through Mike. Well, then it's just information. If it's to become revelation, which will be life transforming, you have to get it from God directly. So if I hear a prophetic word that I resonate with, I take from somebody else. I go back to God with that and I say, God, what are you saying to me through this? Speak to me. You know, does this apply to me? Is there an application that you want me to listen to? I resonated with this. Why? I'm not just going to sit there and read it and think, wow, that's amazing. You know, that's an amazing prophetic word. I want it to be relevant. The only way it's going to be relevant to me is if God speaks the truth of that word to me directly when I engage him around it. That's what I want to encourage people to do. You know, so yes, I've no problem with people saying, hey, God's doing this or saying this, but the real hallmark of someone who carries the word of God is that they will direct people to the living word of God and not to the words that they're saying. You know,
And
otherwise,
yeah. I mean, it's like there needs to be some legislation to protect those who have at least once powerfully used, or I mean, because I don't know if it's the pride of life. It's like there's some entry that puffs them up, and then they no longer become as effective.
well,
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, I think there is a sense of looking to help. Yeah. The problem is when people start to get prophetic things from God, and if it doesn't change them primarily first, then they're just parroting something God said without it actually being lived in their lives. You know, I'm not wanting to share things God said until it's part of me and that I carry it within my life, because then I'm not just a parrot. This is me and my life, which I'm sharing. So I want the testimony to be a reality in my life. Otherwise it's just words, and they can be empty words. And those words, if it's empty and it's not brought transformation in people do get led astray. And, you know, I mean, Bob Jones said many years ago, it's usually the gold, the girls, or the glory. You know, it's either money, it will be sex, or there will be position and power that lead people astray. And those are usually the tactics that the enemy uses to get people off track. And if people start believing their own press about themselves, then it can elevate them to a point. I mean, when you look back at all the scandals that went on, in the televangelists and all that stuff, it's like you think, how were they able to maintain that illusion or feel that they could continue ministering and seeing miracles and all that stuff when they knew that they were engaged with prostitutes or drug taking or whatever, all the other things they were up to? There must have been a heavy delusion that came on them, which meant they were not sensitive to what God was actually saying to them. And I think, we do need to expose those things that are wrong, but also protect those people who need to come into restoration within the process. So I wouldn't knock somebody because they've done something bad. I just want them to acknowledge what they've done and be restored. And it's when people don't acknowledge it is where the issue comes, because they're either too proud to acknowledge it or in fear of what will happen if they acknowledge it and all those things. We need to create safe places where people can be honest and real. Most of the issue with people falling and going astray is they don't have friendships that are open and honest, where people will speak the truth in love to them. If I was going astray, I would expect people to speak to me. I would not want people to hold back if they genuinely felt that something was wrong in my life. Because if your friends are not going to speak the truth to you, who are? But I mean, a big example of this would be someone like Todd Bentley, who was in the Lakeland revival, amazing things happening. There were people who obviously knew what was going on, but because of all the miracles that are happening, didn't challenge it effectively. Now, now, did he not have deep enough relationship? Was there not an accountability in relationship, friendship-wise, that people say, hey, you need to sort out your marriage? Because, he wouldn't have gone down the route that ended up if someone had taken him aside, or if they did, he wasn't willing to listen to it. Perhaps I don't know the details of what went on behind the scenes, obviously, but in those type of things do happen, that when people are highly anointed and seeing miracles, people are unwilling to speak the truth to them. Some of this thing is, don't touch God's anointed and all that sort of stuff. But the same thing happened within the healing revival movements within the 40s and 50s. There were some people who were doing things which were awe-inspiring in terms of the miraculous. And yet they had petty jealousies. They wanted the biggest tent. They wanted to buy the biggest tent to outdo that other person. Someone who died in their early 30s because they overate and basically killed themselves through their lifestyle of eating, and was hugely overweight in eating. Well, did not someone tell them, help them? There were major flaws within that. But someone's got to be willing to be real and honest with people and not be blinded by the superficial miracles that take place. And don't be fooled by thinking that a miracle will validate someone's lifestyle or validate what they believe or teach. People get so caught up with, oh, well, they must be right because look at what's happening through their ministry. And that's not true at all, necessarily. Never use miracles to validate anything in somebody's life. Use the fruit that comes from their genuine relationship that they have and the fruit of the Spirit which is being seen. Yeah, Pam?
It's like, what comes to me is like, what you were talking about the televangelist. It's like when the house was swept clean, we failed to fill it.
Yeah.
So worse came, this judgment, and judgment's not a bad thing. I don't use the word judgment is bad. When the church is swept clean, I guess we just need to legislate that it is filled properly, or
Yeah.
or worse is going to come and fill it. Going to find it empty and fill it with worse.
But I
Because
think this is, in the ecclesia that God is wanting to build, this is why relational foundations are absolutely vital. Not foundations based on gifting or based on that type of thing, but relationship foundations. If you're going to have a bench of 3 or a bench of 7, they must be in relationship with one another to a degree where they're open, honest, and transparent, and can speak the truth in love without fear. Then these things won't happen, because there'll be such a strength in relationship of having each other's back. Hey, when one is struggling, the others are supporting and encouraging, and there's no fear in being real and honest and sharing the reality of what's going on in people's lives, because people know they're not going to be rejected because they're honest about struggling over some issue. Those are the foundations which I think will keep things safe. That's the key, not the cover-ups that go on and all that sort of stuff. I want relationship with people who are going to be real and honest with me, and I can be real and honest with them. That forms a strong foundation, which then other people will be able to come into that environment of openness and honesty and transparency. And again, without fear of hiding and not needing to be covering themselves with masks and pretending and all the stuff. We can be honest and real. It should be an environment where we can be real and bear one another's burdens and help each other and encourage each other to be real. And I think that comes through real relationship. Most of what I've seen is superficial relationship, which is not real. And when it comes to the reality of things, it doesn't stand the weight that's put on it. We need to build the firm foundations. That takes time. You're never going to have a relationship with someone without spending time with them, and spending time for the purpose of having a relationship, not just for the purpose of doing stuff. Or, relationship needs to be in its own right the key, which then everything else flows out of. And it's the same with our relationship with God. We need to have a relationship with God which brings us into a place of rest that everything flows out of, because that's what produces security in our identity in God. And we then don't need to pretend or build up, a following and all the things that go on that we're talking about. It can feel very negative, but actually, in reality, it's a positive thing that we're willing to start talking about the reality of the situation, and we're not just, everything's great. It isn't. Everything's not great within the stream of this stream, whatever it is. There are people who are building empires. There are people who are not relating to one another. There are people who are falling out and not dealing with it. It's going on. It shouldn't be. You think people who are engaging heaven every day would have more sense than live that way, but people are people. And again, if people are being put on pedestals and no one's able to challenge them, and no one is challenging them, or they're not open to challenge, then you're going to get the same things repeating themselves in what God's doing. And you'll get some of the big names within what we're doing end up being exposed if they do not continue the process of transformation. There's no shame in being honest and real that we're not there yet and we're not perfect and we're still working things through, and actually we still fall out with our spouse, or we still have trouble with our kids. And the reality, is the reality of it is, why wouldn't we feel free to be real? If we have strong relationships and real relationships, we can be, and I really want to see a change in some of these dynamics which are going on, which are looking to build empires. It's like they won't last. In the end, they will be shaken and they will end up falling, because God wants to see, well, that which is genuinely based on the kingdom, and that which is based on personality or charisma or gift or vision or whatever it is, based rather than based on in love, will not last the test of time. And so, someone has got to, start legislating for a change to take place, so that we can actually see a difference this time.
Come on, Mike. Let's raise our hands. Let's do that. Let's do that. Let him ambassadors do that.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yeah,
I mean, leaders
when
are
we start meeting that way, I think we will need to do certain things like that, and legislate for these things to take place, and be honest and real about it. And in confidentiality, I'm not going to expose people publicly or expose names publicly, because that is not the right thing to do. But I do think we need to be open to talk about the situations that are going on, and then privately with those who are legislating governmentally to do things in love to help facilitate change and transformation to take place. I think it's really, really important that there are no-go areas. Oh, well, we can't say anything in that situation. Why not? If you see something and God has shown you it, why shouldn't you say something? Now, I know the issue is, hey, we'll talk to the person first. And I have, in situations where I'm aware, I have talked to the person and tried to resolve things. But that doesn't always get resolved if the person is not open to resolve it. So you can only do and make sure your heart is right and the motives of your heart is right in what you're doing to facilitate someone being restored, or if that is bringing something into the light, that it's a restorational process, not a detrimental process to people. If I want things to come into the light, it's because I want to see people changed by the light, not just exposed and damaged by the light. The whole heart is we should be wanting to see each other lifted up and brought into the fullness of sonship. But sometimes you have to speak the truth as it is for that process to take place, and look to legislate and facilitate it for it. Not in any way in a controlling way, but in a loving way, to actually see people come into the fullness of their destiny. I don't want to see people robbed, and I don't want to see people lose what God is doing in them because of some flaw or some deep-rooted sin or some issue of control or whatever is going on. I want to see people fully fulfilling their sonship roles, whoever they are. Anyway, okay. Anyone else want to share something or ask something who hadn't shared anything as yet? If you'd like to.
I've got one more question I'd like to address if no one else wants to speak. My question is, I'm from West Texas, and it's from Odessa, Texas. We're right in the middle of the oil fields. A lot of boomtown things happening around here. Our population in the area has probably doubled in the last year or so. It's crazy. And one of the things that many of my friends and I have talked about multiple times are all the strange things that happen here. We have motorcycle gangs coming in. We're kind of right in the corner of Texas, the west side of Texas, where we're real close to Mexico. We're real close to El Paso. We're close to halfway between El Paso and Dallas. We have a lot of people here that are really self-centered, I guess is a good way to put that. It's the driving is horrific. It's just, everything is just chaos. And I have a small group that meets at my home, and we most of the people that are in that are not really familiar with legislating and court things like that, although a little bit, but just very basic stuff. And my question is, how or where would you suggest we start? There's so much that needs to be addressed that just to begin, it's almost overwhelming to even begin to take on a subject. I mean, my wife and I do what we can, but, and like you were talking about being open and straight with people, that gets met pretty rough sometimes, to say the least. So,
I mean, I think the key in it is, don't just think because there's a problem that you have to fix it. Make sure you get a clear mandate of what God's heart is for you within it. And then you're only going to do what you engage the Father's heart about. So I mean, the world is full of all sorts of problems, you know, and people can get overwhelmed by the nature of those problems. And then, like, as you say, well, where do we start? Well, the thing to start with is, okay, God, show us your heart and give us a clarity about what you're calling us to engage in. And then focus on that. And then maybe when you've dealt with that, God will move you into something else. But, you know, it's dealing with the things that he's wanting to deal with. And often that starts with us. You know, I always say, before I start, you know, Jesus was like, you know, the log and the speck. You know, before I start dealing with the logs out there, you know, the specks out there in other people, I need to deal with the log in me. So often, if we're going to deal with something which is, you're talking really about an atmospheric thing that's being controlled by the principalities and powers and rulers in the atmosphere, and their influence in the culture that you're involved in, the first thing to make sure is that that is not affecting you. That you deal with anything of that operating in you first, then you have a testimony of not being subject to that yourself. And a small group also needs to look at that, you know, identifying the things that are going on. Okay, you talk about selfishness and self-centeredness. Okay, well, let's ask God to show us where we are operating in that. Ooh, oh, I'm not sure. I wanted to deal with the community. I want to deal with me. So it always starts with us, because if we have not dealt with it in us, we do not have the authority to deal with it anywhere else. So whenever we do a court case, which is a corporate court case on behalf of something we're doing, we always give the group who are doing it the time to see, is anything of that operating in me? Do I need to take this to the court myself? And do I need to deal with the accusations? And therefore, having dealt with that, otherwise, when you come to deal with it corporately, you'll find that you'll get people's stuff coming out of their soul, rather than it coming from a direct, here's the accusation, I'm seeing it. You'll get people's pet hates coming up. You'll get people's, you know, real issues, you know, and you'll hear the same thing. Oh, so this is the problem. If we only dealt with that problem, because it's a problem in them, you know. And so we always encourage people, go to God yourself, make sure that you deal with any accusations that are operating in you. So then when we come together to do something corporate, we're not picking up the soul stuff where the enemy is accusing us. You know, deal with our own accusations, deal with that first, and then it's so much easier then to see the reality of what's going on and not be veiled by the things in our own lives. That would be, you know, my encouragement in that. Because I guarantee if there's an issue within the communities in which we live, we're affected by it in some way, or we're operating in it in some way. If we deal with that, then it gives us a greater dimension of authority to deal with it in a wider setting. Also, make sure you're dealing with it from a position where you're seated above it in the heavens. Don't try and do spiritual warfare on earth against things that are on earth, because you'll end up running into problems in that way, which is why legislation is done from a heavenly perspective, where you're above what you're dealing with and it's under your feet effectively, not doing hand-to-hand battle with things that are there, or trying to do spiritual battle with things, which is what the angels are for. You know, I don't have to deal with a principality and power and ruler. I just need to interact with the correct principality and power and ruler that God's assigned to go and take authority in that. But they can't do that on our assignment if we're subject to what those principalities and powers are doing in the earth, which is why we have to establish a beachhead on earth which is not subject to that. And that could be a few people who are honestly dealing with those things in their own lives to start with. Then you can then start to look at how you deal with it, you know, governmentally from above.
That's really good. Thank you.
All right. Okay. All right. I need to leave it there. Nice seeing you all today. And